I'm for going back to the 13th century, personally. Is that the question?
No.
Well, what?
He was much on my mind as I came here tonight.
But I mean,
I thought, here I am facing the anti-Galilean forces once again. And I expected them to be very, very old. So this very strange. Very strange arrangement.
If I can...
David?
Yeah, the gentleman has repeated a hoary old myth about Galileo. He actually was not persecuted for what his astrological discoveries. He was persecuted for various other things. He was patronized by the Pope. And he didn't get into trouble with the Pope until he crossed swords with the papacy on completely different issues.
That's not true. He was tried and scored.
Okay.
He didn't follow the purple vote.
The next debate is about Galileo.
Read some history books that have been written within the last 30 years.
Okay. Why don't we go have another question? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I just want to make the point, and I think this is directed at Daisy, who talked about racism and bigotry and then just talked about her Jewish friend. And you are against the motion to offend, and yet I think you offended most of the people in this room. And if anybody has a comment on that, I'd like to hear it.
I wasn't offended.
My Jewish friend came to my aid and
Nor
came
was
to the
I
aid of
actually.
my
I was only
community.
pretending to be offended.
I was just fascinated that she only had one.
Me too.
I don't believe
Me
she
too.
has one. I want to know that rabbi's name.
It ought to be traceable.
Not one.
But I suggest that she speak to some others, because really, it's not a majority view amongst Jews, and to try and invoke her one Jewish friend to make this majority view is quite preposterous.
Yeah, no, what you're saying, Philip, is preposterous. Throughout Europe, the Jewish communities were very divided over the Danish cartoon issue.
The European Jewish communities have virtually been eradicated.
Let him finish. David, go ahead.
They live here, buddy. They live here now.
A lot of the Jewish communities in Europe, including the Jewish community in Britain, and these views are articulated by the chief rabbi Jonathan Sachs, felt that the cartoons were not only offensive, they were dangerous for the reasons that Daisy gave, and yes, because to many Jewish people, that kind of demonization of a religion and a religious ethnic group brought back some very sick and bad memories. And that is why in Europe there is a much greater tolerance of what this side of the House is advocating than on that side, which is displaying an extraordinary degree not only of disrespect but also of arrogance and an astonishing unwillingness to face a real past.
I'm highly interested in facing a real past, and that's particularly why I feel that if your belief is that by muzzling Nazis you're making us safe, I hope you're not watching my back when they come back at us. I'm telling you the truth. If you think that there's a mute button and that by saying, oh, Nazis can't speak in public, Nazis must be put in jail, we're going to eradicate Nazism, rather than by having Nazis in a country where you can actually speak to them and argue with them and not dignify them by putting them on trial every time they say something completely idiotic. You're elevating Nazis and putting them down and then inciting a couple of politicians in Europe.
It doesn't dignify them. David Irving's battle against Deborah Lipstadt exposed him for what he was. It was very effective.
He exposed himself for what he was. He said the Holocaust didn't exist, and it did. If you were to eradicate all false history, you'd have to stop all newspapers. It's ridiculous.
I beg your pardon.
Faced by a prison sentence, David Irving courageously renounced all that he's previously said about denying the Holocaust. The trial was very effective. Now, I don't actually agree with putting people in prison for advocating Nazi propaganda and a version of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, because that's what David Irving does. It's not a kind of genteel rewriting of history, which Christopher seems to think. It is the most poisonous kind of conspiracy theory.
How do I seem to think that?
Well, it's what you said in your article.
To the
contrary.
You said very much
just earlier, that he is engaged in the revision of history. He's not. He's a neo-Nazi propagandist, and this is what Justice Gray said in the verdict in his battle with Deborah Lipstadt. He is a neo-Nazi political activist, and he is using distorted history to propagandize for his cause.
And nobody had much heard of him until you put him on trial.
Well, you can fill it. You're a journalist. You're supposed to know these facts. He's a best-selling author. He's a very important guy. He gets into people's living rooms. And not for a while, though, because he's in a prison cell.
Nazis always get in the living
room.
No,
and his book, his edition of the Goebbels Diary, is a very useful and interesting book that everyone who wants to know more about the period should read.
For
example, it's only in that book that it's proved that the British Union of Fascists took money from the Nazi Party, a claim they always denied. The question is, do you think you're big enough to read a book by David Irving and make up your own mind about it, or do you think that someone else should do that for me, right?
Next question.
Very simple question.
Okay.
Alan Miller.
You can answer that.
Alan Miller, New York Salon. I do take issue particularly with David Cesarani's view when he talks about how vulnerable everyone is and that it's almost like an egalitarian speak. This notion that humans are not robust and cannot discuss ideas and make decisions and be autonomous. And so my question to the panel tonight is, when it comes to the really tricky, sticky issues, like a discussion like we see around children and paedophilia, or as we see on the campuses, where we see like speech etiquette, or when we see in the workplace speeches of code, would they agree with, for the prospect, that you should have the right to be offensive and free speech at all times? That's my question to them.
Mari, can you address that?
The line that I draw is between the right to dissent, to express your opinion, if you're Galileo, to oppose the powers that be and say that the sun is the center of the universe. That's free speech. That's what we need for democracy to thrive. The speech that I think is of lower value and that I'm asking us to consider restricting is speech that assaults, wounds, degrades, and excludes. Let me give you a specific example since you raised the workplace. It's a frequent pattern that the first woman to show up in a traditionally male job in the coal mine on the oil rig is relentlessly harassed with words. Men describing her body and saying they would like to rape her and describing what that would be like. And she goes to work every day and tries to do her job up on a construction site. I think that goes beyond offense. I think that is an effort to exclude. And people use these words because they're tied to a history of violence, because they do terrorize people. That is their intent. Now, the other side is trying to say that we're for opening the door of censorship. I certainly don't stand for that. I think that this audience voted in the vast majority for the proposition precisely because they distrust censorship, and that's good. That's important. Any effort to limit speech has to be done carefully, through the rule of law, with discernment. But we can do it. We've done that with defamation. We allow people to insult each other, but we don't allow them to destroy character and reputation in ways that the law calls actual malice. It's very close to requiring intent. And that's a limit. That means a lot of very nasty speech is still allowed. But we're trying to create that breathing space so that woman can go to work, so that family that's the wrong race can move into that neighborhood, where we can have conversations like this one that are very hard. If it degenerates into name-calling, the conversation shuts down. And what I'm trying to do is prevent the conversation ending move in a world in which we need to talk.
That was Mari Matsuda. Signe Wilkinson?
I have one little example of how this works in the real world was in the early 90s or the mid-90s in the University of Pennsylvania. There were some kids making noise outside of a dorm room. Some guy leaned out the window and told the water buffaloes to shut up. And the water buffaloes took it to the speech code people at the university. Had they not, the guy who had said water buffaloes would have been the jerk that he was. But as it turned out, then the girls who got all upset about it, they made a federal case out of it. They ended up looking stupid, as did the administration of the University of Pennsylvania, because water buffaloes, I mean, where are you going to draw the line? You can't. It's an animal. It's not like saying I'm going to kill you. So I mean, to me, it's like if you let someone say something stupid, they're the ones who look idiotic. If then you start, like David Irving, I might add, but when you start taking him on and